Fucking... I have hit the button. Excellent connection. Excellent connection at 10,000 kbps. Alright, I'm gonna say words. Everybody else say words.
Eggplant.
Everybody else say words.
Words.
Eggplant.
Words.
Alright. Ace, I think we're on. And at fucking higher quality settings. So, for those of you who don't know, my internet has been cunted for years, and generally speaking, like, that's why there's been some slowdowns. But I have upgraded internet and an Ethernet cable, Cat 8 Ethernet cable. So now, my internet is, like, literally 20 times faster than it was. So I uncunted my net, and it should be able to be actually, like, you know, stable for once. So, welcome to a new era of seeing like really close to my tits, like in high definition. Everybody just bask in the
High definition nibbles.
Yeah.
It's an honor. It's truly an honor.
Yeah, the inaugural HD titty stream. You can see my.
That should have been the name in hindsight.
Yeah, but this is funnier because it's like nobody's gonna know what we mean by any of this. So if anybody clicks this, it'll be like extra fuzz. It'll grow mold in their teeth. So, anyway, y'all are bearing witness to greatness as we talk about our preferred schools of anarchy and anarchy in general. This is just sort of an ad hoc stream. We wanted to make this happen because I don't know, shit's been high tension lately. And, like, this will just be a good chance for us to chill. Also, because, I've been frying my brain, like, waking up at 5:30, and going and working on a roof in above 100-degree temperatures for, like, you know, most of a day, for 2 days in a row. So, I hate things, and, I didn't have enough real time to, like, put in the preliminary work on drilling down on the subject we'll be talking about on Sunday, which is Project 2025. Feel free to watch us fuck that dead rabbit. So the general like vibe of this one is we're just a casual discussion. And we might do another one of these, which will just be a general fucking vibes thing. And also, I wanted to let y'all know that today is National Hot Dog Day. So if you don't have a chili dog on this Chili Dog Wednesday, your immortal soul is forever tainted to be slow. You've been warned.
My immortal soul shall be tainted then, because I just can't do hot dogs, man.
Well, see, let me ask you: is it any sausage or is it just hot dogs?
No, I'll do brats all day long, dude.
That qualifies. You could just do a chili dog with a bratwurst instead.
Cool beans.
Yeah,
I'm not falling for it. I know what those chili dogs are made out of.
Right?
Yeah.
Secret sauce recipe. So with that being said, words. We'll start with Jason since he's on here the most rarely. We'll go Dana. We'll go Bryce, and then we'll go Rose. And y'all already know me and the voices in my head. So.
I'm Jason. I live out in rural Kentucky. We homestead and homeschool and try to produce as much as we can, so we have to buy as little as possible. And when we do buy, we try to get as, you know, few hands in it as possible. So, like, you know, we try to buy local meat, local everything and from the producers, not from you know, secondhand through grocery stores, shit like that. I want the government to get its fingers on taxes as little as possible. My goal is life. Hey,
hello, Keith.
Hello.
So Jason can do his intro. Dana will do Keith, Bryce, Rose.
Do I have to do it again?
No. You're just reestablishing some order here.
Oh yeah, okay. So yeah, I'm Jason. I live out in rural Hancock County, Kentucky, and we homeschool and homestead and
Good.
That's it, man. Agorism. Yeah, man.
Hashtag living the philosophy.
Trying as much as I can. It's hard, dude.
Well, anytime somebody gives you a hard time about being hard, just punch them really hard in their face and say, "Praxis, bitch." So, Dana, Keith.
Okay, I'll go. Dana Carver. I live in very, very rural Sheboygan County, Michigan. We can't see a neighbor where we live. We're way back in the woods. Very blessed in that. Now, we used to do a lot more homesteading, but my husband retired and made us get rid of the chickens, and we don't do pigs anymore because he wanted to spend more time doing things instead of having to deal with the farm. But I'm ready to go back to chickens and pigs because now we have to buy it from other people.
Yeah.
Sometimes the grocery store people are out. But yes, we have a nice little area up here. Barter is huge with us.
Yep.
You don't really realize what you can get with, like, if you grow really good weed, you can barter for a lot of things, and it's wonderful. Yeah, so it's just, we live in a great area, and as far as my school of anarchism, I never really fit in a box ever. I'm not good at that, but closest thing would be agorism, pretty much. And I fell off the wagon a couple years ago and rejoined the LP, and that's been a shit show. So, I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to get back on the wagon soon, but I'd kind of like to wait till 2025, help repair what's going on in Michigan, and then get back on the wagon because it's just too much. I had this wonderful year and a half, 2 years of no party bullshit, and it was great.
Keith, we're talking about general schools of anarchy and what your preferred one is. I know you're a panarchist, so this will be an interesting stream for you.
Yeah, I've been interested in anarchism and related ideas for about 40 years. I've actually been in different types of anarchist and related groups probably since around 1988. I was in the IWW at one point. I used to be on the national committee of the U.S. section of the IWA. As far as the Libertarian Party, I was sort of an inactive member of that for about a year. I was sort of in the early 90s. And I've mostly done my own thing over the years. You can find out more about me at a website called attackthesystem.com. You can order back copies of my books and find essays I've written and that kind of stuff. You can just Google my name. If you want to know what my enemies say about me, you can Google my name as well. But as far as schools of anarchism, I think all of them are interesting up to a point. I'm interested in panarchism, as Jeremiah said. And I'm also interested in a lot of the, I guess that's panarchism is sort of a meta-political concept, but I'm interested in a lot of the others, agorism and mutualism, anarcho-syndicalism, individualist anarchism. There's quite a few. I don't know that I'm really that committed to any one.
Gotcha. We got Karam. So you can introduce yourself, and we'll go with Bryce and Rose.
I see how it is.
Yeah, well, because y'all, I want y'all to have the chance to really lean into the meat of some of these things you wanted to sling in the beginning. So I want as many people here watching as possible when Bryce lays into this individual. So Kareem,
you want to sling meat?
Yes.
Sounds carnivore, like Liver King. Hey, I'm Kareem. I'm a pan-anarchist, and I also do Anarch Unity. I'm going to be starting that back up soon, and I comment on political stuff on my channel, The Essential Libertarians, and fun stuff like that. So let's have a good conversation. Let's give it a good shot.
Cockversation, Bryce. Also, Kareem headphones.
Echo.
Alright, Bryce.
Alright, I'm Bryce. I'm the Congressional District 3 rep for the Wisconsin Libertarian Party. I am a Catholic anarchist with Austrian econ views. I am also a state organizer caucus now. And I was just made aware today that Kristen Walker, the CD4 rep, watching the stream. If you ever want to come on and talk about whatever I said that was wrong in relation to what's going on in Wisconsin with suspending Stephen Ecker and whatnot, right here's the place. Let's hash that out. Personal insults in a YouTube comment section don't really sit well with me. So yeah, let's not hide behind a keyboard. Get on here and face me.
Do
Fucking based.
Rose?
And I'm Rose. I'm sure you remember me. I am simultaneously a filthy commie and a far-right reactionary. Also part-time big libertarian, involved in the New York Libertarian Party National Platform Committee. And that's about it for now.
All right. So I'm I have a specific version that I'm writing a book about, like anarcho-coalitionism, build, break, but most like specifically use coalitions with all like forms of anarchist to do specific actions to destabilize the system. That's my deal. People here know that. I'm that cunt who talks too much about Sonic, and if you are here, I'm sorry. But we should have a relatively good stream. This is lots of people, lots of perspectives, and the first thing I want to ask for everybody here is, like, for your particular persuasion, like, what has Anarchy done in terms of, like, giving you guidance toward a better existence?
Well, it's a set of principles for me. It's the core principles of the idea. You know, that's I talk about agorism, but really for me, it's just agorism is what anarchists do when there's a state and they can't be anarchists. You know, you practice agorism because that's all you have. If you're gonna apply your principles without getting actually violent, that's I think that's as far as you can go.
Right, like for me, it's just like, I mean, I've been an anarchist from basically as early as I can remember, before I even knew that it had a word. I've just basically hated authority from the time I was born. Like, I remember being in kindergarten and trying to red pill my fellow kindergartners. I'm like, why do these teachers just automatically get to have authority over the rest of us just because they're older? Like, why does that mean that they can tell us what to do?
Uh-huh.
And no one ever fucking listened. They would just look at me like I was crazy. But I think I was a teenager by the time I realized, oh, hey, there's actually a name for this thing that I am, and there's like literature written on the subject. So I started getting interested and reading people like Emma Goldman and Kropotkin. I became very anti-war and involved in the punk scene. So, yeah, basically, I'm one of those people who was basically born an anarchist. As far as I'm concerned, it has to do with the desire to be liberated from oppression and to not be controlled.
Yeah.
Well, in my case, I think I was probably instinctively an anti-institutionalist as well from birth onward. I know as a kid, whenever there was an election, I always rooted for the opposition candidate, you know, like whoever that was at the time, even though I didn't know anything about their platform or ideology or any of that stuff. And when I think I first heard of the Libertarian Party, I think around it was in 1980 when the Libertarian guy was running against Carter and Reagan. I remember seeing a television interview with him, and he was explaining some of his ideas and thinking, oh yeah, that's kind of interesting, but I never really thought much more about it until later. A few years later, I remember I was in an English lit class, and we were reading about the Romance poets and like Shelley and Byron and Keats and all of those. And I remember reading that that Shelley was the son-in-law of William Godwin, an anarchist, and I'm like, wow, that's interesting. That's really such a thing as that. So over time, I investigated that a little bit more and found out about people like Pierre Joseph Proudhon and all of the classical stuff. I mean, I was really young then, but and then I just built on that very gradually over a period of years and then decades. What I find probably to be the first principle is the question of, well, where do institutions get their power from in the first place? So where, it's kind of like what Rose was saying. Like, although with me it was more the government. It's like, well, where did the government come from, and why should they be able to tell us what to do in the first place? What's so important about them? And going back and tracing the history of the state. I'm a professional historian, so tracing the history of the state, I started to investigate what's called force theory, and this is a political science concept that basically says, well, the reason we have states is because they engage in conquest and plunder, as opposed to the mainstream view, which is the social contract theory, or then the older divine right theory. So in other words, when Augustine, the theologian Augustine, said that the state is just a robber band writ large, he was right. That's so governments, countries, nation states, whatever we want to call them, are basically just collections of mafia organizations. I mean, what does the mafia do? Well, the mafia tries to control territory, monopolize resources, exploit subjects. They've got an elite that's artificially protected, not because there's anything virtuous or meritorious about them. They just exercise the greatest amount of violence. They use violence to eliminate competitors. They try to expand their own realm of influence. And then they even have their own ideological superstructure as a means of self-legitimation, just like, states have, whether it's the, social contract theory or dictatorship of the proletariat or the fear of principle, the divine right of kings or the god emperor. In the organized crime, you go through your rituals and blood oaths and that kind of stuff. So, and that's how the world works. You have these conglomerations of organized crime groups that are struggling for territory and resources. And that's pretty much the foundation of the anarchist critique of institutional authority generally, I think. Because most institutions, the state is like the nexus through which other institutions intersect. The state props up a lot of other institutions, or a lot of the other institutions are adjacent to the state. So for me, I start with the analytical framework, which is more empirical, and that's before you get to any normative or prescriptive statements.
Yeah. About you, Bryce, how'd you arrive at this bus?
Well, so similar to Rose, I was probably like just naturally born an anarchist. I don't know if I had my realization like quite as early, probably not kindergarten, but I'd always had issues kind of with authority figures, didn't really trust them, just naturally had a disliking towards them. When I first realized what anarchism was, I was probably more in line with anarcho-syndicalism. I would say it's probably where my views kind of lined up. As time progressed, I started realizing that from my perspective, the economic right seemed more correct, especially Austrian econ. I started diving into like Mises and Rothbard and Bastiat and all that good stuff. And then I was born and raised Catholic, had no issues with the Catholic faith. I still been a little lagging behind on attending Mass, but I think God will forgive me for that. Realized that there was actually an ideology for that as well, and it seems to fit kind of right along where I line up with. So that leads us to where we are today, I guess.
And how'd you get there, Dana?
Well, for me, it was kind of a traveling thing too. I was always bucking the system as well. I mean, I was the one like refusing to say the Pledge of Allegiance because I was like, I don't want to pledge to things, and fighting the seatbelt law when I was 13 because I was like, I'm not wearing it. It wasn't against the law yesterday. Just different things like that. I ran away from home a lot, but at a young age, I had kids and got married and bought a house at like 17. So I jumped into raising kids and didn't even pay attention to politics. Then around my 30s, when the cannabis stuff started heating up, I decided I needed to jump into politics. And then I started seeing, the different things that were going on, and I started getting more and more interested. So I started, learning more about the law and stuff like that, and jumped on the Republican Party train and was going to save it from within, help Ron Paul save it from within and all that good stuff. And that didn't work out well. And during that time, I was reading everything I could get my hands on. And so I was like, that was like 30. So it's about 20 years ago, 20 some years ago. Anyway,
Yeah.
So as I was going through it, of course I, started meeting more and more anarchists, and, they turned me on to Conklin and, Conklin and Spooner and Bastiat and all the things. And Spooner was where I really landed. I was like, oh my God, I didn't sign shit either. Oh my, and that I became a jury nullification person, handing out fully informed jury nullification stuff. I mean, that was kind of my travels. And then it kind of like most of my friends, they were like, what does the government do for you? And I'm like, fucking nothing. Well, then there's your answer. So yeah, I just kind of became an anarchist and kind of went from there. And to me, it's just the philosophy of, being left alone. I just want to be left the hell alone. I don't want the government involved in my life. I don't want anybody controlling my life. And I never have. I mean, that's why I went and bought a house at 17 and moved out and did the thing, And so, yeah, and it's just, and you can fight your government as much as you want. You can make some wins. We made a lot of wins, but then you win at one level and you can never win at other levels. So it's more like just leave it the hell alone and live your freaking life.
For real. And Kareem, how'd you find Anarchy?
When I found you, no.
Right.
I was 13. I tell the story. I was 13. I tried to impress my friends who were listening to Blink-182 at the time, pop punk. Then they started getting me into anarchist punk type stuff, Black Flag, all that, which was fine. But then I found a band called Crass. They had a saying Penny Rumbard wrote, who was the drummer, the only authority is yourself. So I had AOL at the time. I print that out. I'm like, that seems profound knowledge. What the heck does that mean? The only authority is yourself. See, nobody really explained that to me, but I was trying to figure it out. And really the conclusion I came to, which I found on a YouTube video later, is life, you're responsible for your life. Take responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started to look more into anarchy and stuff like that. The problem with a lot of the punk movement is like I'm like, okay, I like this. I like anarchy. I like the anti-Bush stuff. But like, what are you going to do for practical, like everyday things? Like, can I still keep my laptop and stuff like that? A lot of anarchy was left at the time. So I didn't really jive with it. Then I heard Ron Paul insulting Rudy Giuliani. I'm like, I like this guy. Seeing him on Bill Maher. I said, wow, Ron Paul's really got this. But if there was just a form of anarchy where I could keep my laptop, my video games, and my Bitcoin, I'll be that anarchist. So I heard Adam Kokesh on Adam versus the Man saying ANCAPs are the only anarchy. Looked up Anarcast, said, I'm an ANCAP. I must be an ANCAP. But then over time, I got to see Ron Paul eventually at the Libertarian National Convention. Everybody was mentioning Michael Malice. So I looked at his book, and I wasn't that impressed because I saw just essays from other people.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was the issue. But I was like, okay, there's Emma Goldman. And Emma Goldman said there was no communism in Russia, and she has some pretty good quotes. Why don't you say that? That makes no sense to me. Obviously, the USSR was communist, right? Obviously, Soviets were just Gorbachev or whatever. But I didn't really understand that. So I said, okay, well, this doesn't make sense. And then I had a co-host at the time, Daniel Bitro. I said, get some left libertarians on, if you want to call that, or get some other people to talk to. Jeremy comes on one day. We have a talk. Now, I was actually going the wrong way. I was going like the Nick Fuentes, direct. I even liked Nick Fuentes at the time. Like, the Groypers are cool. He's saying edgy stuff. He made Dan Crenshaw cry. come to find out he was a fascist, and then I'm like, wait, maybe I got things wrong. Then I ran into other left libertarians, from Mad Liberty, which is a unity group, did pull up the audiobook Kropotkin, and I said, look, Jeremy used the term pan-anarchist. If I can find one person who says they're a pan-anarchist, and it makes sense, maybe I'd be open to all forms of anarchy. I don't think there's one that works. Typed in panarchy, found Keith Preston. I'm like, okay, I guess that's what I am. And then further went through like, okay, well, how would you actually structure this? And then got his book, Mistakes of Anarchists, and I said, I like the idea of pan-anarchy. How would we get there from practically? And the best person I can think who gave ideas to that, two people, are Murray Bookchin in his idealism, and a guy named Abdullah Asif.
Sorry, Kareem, you started to break up just now. I don't know why.
Hello? Am I here?
You're there.
Okay. So to end this, to bring it in for a landing, I found Bookchin, I found Abdullah Aslan, and said democratic confederalism would be a good start to get to panarchy, having free, if you want to call it free markets, but also having democratic councils and people that we can work with, delegates, to help break up the empire and come up with different communities that represent different ideas. That's how I got there. That's where I'm at.
Cool. So the next thing is, probably this will just be a general question. I know that we've already talked about agorism and homesteading. Twofold. So the first thing I'll ask is, if somebody was to ask you the first step to getting into an anarchist actually lifestyle and like living it, what would be the first thing that comes to mind in terms of recommendations? We'll get an answer from each of you.
Move to the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. Just get as far away as you can. That's the best you got. I'm like her. I can't even see a neighbor out here. There ain't nothing. I can deer hunt in my front yard.
Yeah. I've actually brought this up. It's been a little bit since I brought it up because obviously I'm not in the greatest situation financially right now either, and I understand other people aren't either. But the first step would be to find one of the very, very rural states and just set up an intentional community in them. I was specifically talking Montana. Set up a fucking compound in Montana and just fucking do libertarian, anarchism.
Anarchy is just pure libertarianism.
Well, yeah, I mean, the words can be interchangeable, but obviously there's certain people that don't quite understand that might contend that point.
Yeah, well...
Oh, yeah, it's annoying. People don't know their roots, and they think that libertarian means minarchist, when, no, that's a recent development. That annoys the...
Yep.
There was a point in time where libertarianism didn't even mean anarchist right. You know, that was a development that didn't start coming around until the late 1800s, early 1900s.
That's right.
So, yeah, for me, I would say the first step would be networking and finding like-minded individuals who you could form things like a skill-sharing network or bartering network with. Okay, you can move out to the middle of nowhere. I'd love to be able to do that too, but, if you don't have connections, okay, so where do you go from there?
That's exactly right. You're right about that. You do need a community. It's a lot easier to get things done, when you're not trying to raise cattle and pigs and chickens and the garden and take care of the shop and the machinery and everything. If you're not trying to do all of it, that whole me and my 4 neighbors here are going to cover down on this shit and we're going to swap stuff and everybody's going to be fed and happy. Fat and happy is what it's about.
Right. Labor specialization is definitely a thing. So being completely self-sufficient in this day and age is difficult. I know some people do it, but yeah, it's not really realistic for most people. So being able to have connections who have a certain skill set is useful.
Yeah. What you got, Dana?
Oh, I already said move out in the middle of nowhere. But like with the connections, you can find things. Like we needed a tree topped. Like I didn't want the whole tree gone. We needed the tree topped, and neither me or my husband is going to climb up a tree and top it. But we know a tree guy, so we bartered his services. You got to make the connections with the people, and you find them even in the middle of nowhere. It's easy to find people and make those connections. But I mean, if you are living in the city, you just got to find people there too. It's just a little harder there because your neighbors are prying and you got planning and zoning up your ass and all that kind of crap. So it's really kind of hard to branch out and do your own thing.
Right. No, it's getting harder and harder to, even if you can get property. I think one of the primary criticisms I've seen of the ASIS strategy, and this is fair, is that it's really hard to implement because property taxes are always going to be a thing. Okay, yeah, you can try to dodge as many taxes as you can, and it's better than nothing. But if you own property, you're either going to be subject to property taxes, or you're going to be constantly at risk of having everything you own and have worked for seized from you.
So my husband got really smart when he was getting it was vacation property at first. He had 2 houses, and this before we were together. He went and shopped for the cheapest, most rural place that he could find in northern Michigan to buy a house, so that we don't pay much at all in taxes. I think we're up to almost $1,000 a year, so that's pretty good. You just got to kind of shop around for the tax base.
Yeah,
I'm
we were looking for services. We didn't want any services. All our town has is a volunteer fire department, and that's it. And
my mortgage
get rid of planning and zoning and
more
all
than
that.
doubled by the fucking taxes. More than doubled.
By the way, real quick, we got somebody I think new in chat called. Well, I'm not even gonna advertise this guy, but he is a he is a Republican nationalist from Southern Carolina. I'm tired. I've been roofing 2 days, so South Carolina nationalist, fucking showing up to say concerning. So. Hello to you. Maybe learn something instead of just being concerned. Also, I don't know why you've been on Twitter since August 2023 and you only have 5 followers, but I think that should be concerning. Anyway, Hody, introduced.
Ouch.
Oh, hey guys, I'm just showing up again. I'm Hody Johns. I'm with the Love First Christians. We actually just finished our Bible study, which is why I'm late to this. I love Jeremy. Well, now I'm going to have to say everybody by name or they're going to think I don't love them. Keith, Jason, Rose, Dana, Bryce, and I'd save the best for last, my man Kareem over there, doing good on Instagram, seeing some happy posts from him. I have a spiritual Christian take on stuff of today. There you go.
And what originally pushed you to Anarchy?
Ooh, okay. I am probably the stereotypical person that went Republican to Libertarian when the Republicans let him down. And then after being Libertarian for so long, you talk with those who are like, hey, it's only a matter of time until you love this Anarchy thing. My initial put off, my only resistance put off really was definitionally, because I think by the strict, I was big on history. And the biggest thing keep me out of it was the early anarchists, like the very first anarchists, like Proudhon and stuff, flatly rejecting that people, not just hierarchy, because I actually, in a strict sense, I reject hierarchy as well. Just because people are different or better at something doesn't give them the right to rule over people. So I actually do reject hierarchy. However, they were going for like anybody who's different or better or worse at something is going to rule over the others. And so they looked for kind of creepy ways to make it so that like nobody could be smarter than anybody else. It'll give you the willies as a modern reader, because I think even the craziest leftists don't think that anymore. It's something the anarchists left behind. The thing is because I locked them into that definition of like the founders, I was unable to embrace kind of what they were. And when somebody's like, well, if you're all about voluntarism, which I am, I think all things should be voluntary. I had a talk with Larkin Rose about it. That was live. And he was like, you're not calling yourself an anarchist, and that's fine, but you should know that like functionally by modern standards, you are. Like, you push for a completely voluntary system and society. And I think because I'd read so much original anarchist literature, I thought that there was no way it could happen. But the more I got in the community, the more I could see there was really a place for people like me. And I've enjoyed it ever since. There are obviously hostile anarchists, and I find that my block button works well for them. And so I have nothing but positive things to say about the rest of them.
And what is the first piece of advice you would give to somebody trying to get into anarchy?
Piece of advice for somebody trying to get into anarchy? Don't focus on politics. Focus on spirituality. Focus on yourself. Focus on your family. Focus on love. I would rather have somebody not be a fundamental anarchist, like the government is bad technically because this. I would rather have somebody who loves their neighbor and sees government get in the way of that. I would rather have somebody try to feed the homeless and see government get in the way of that. I would rather have somebody love foreigners and sick of seeing them get blown apart, blown to bits overseas, and say, I'm against that. And ultimately, I would rather you have that journey into anarchy than simply taking it as a political solution or pill. Right. Ultimately, anarchy is the non-solution. Anarchy is the start of your philosophy, not the end. Anarchy is saying, get government out. That's great. That's the first step. The rest of it is, how do we heal those people? And it's, I want to heal people so much that I can't have this government getting in the way of it. As opposed to the ideological anarchists, which are kind of like, no government is the solution, that is the end goal, and if there's piracy and murder and death and hatred of our neighbors, then that's okay as long as government's not involved, which is really, I mean, if you read enough Marx, it's pretty Marxist, and unfortunately a lot of ANCAPs go down that route. It blows my mind, but anyway, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Rose, first thing you would tell somebody trying to get into anarchy?
Don't hyphenate anarchy, or don't be an anarcho-anything, okay? That's just needlessly divisive, it leads to unnecessary infighting and battles over who's the real anarchist.
Right.
Hey, no, if you're consistently anti-unjust hierarchy, you're an anarchist. Okay, there are different varieties of anarchists that developed in response to different local conditions and different customs.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, if you are consistently anti-authority, you're an anarchist, as far as I'm concerned.
Gotcha. About you, we'll go Kareem and then Keith. First thing you would say?
I would say first, just really do a little bit of soul searching and watch. Hody mentioned Larkin Rose, the biggest superstition, easy to understand. Hey, there are these people here that say I have power over me. But it doesn't make any sense, because if I can't do X, steal, then how did these people get to do it? And if I can't take taxes, if I can't conscript soldiers, which it seems they want to do, J.D. Vance, there's a Republican here, so J.D. Vance is going for war with Iran already. It's kind of a little early. But then if I can't do that, what gives Congress the right to do that? Oh, well, but wait, then you ask those questions. And then you come to the conclusion that these people literally don't have any magical thing. They're just criminals. They're just the mafia. But then there's a solution, because a lot of people just fall into the thing. I think even Bakunin does, Rothbard does, even some of these good writers fall into the issue of, okay, let's just criticize the state bad. I'm like, that's okay, but you need a positive thing. What do we want to do? And where I would first start is, I think there's a few good books to really nail this down and what we'll do practically. Keith has a good book, Failures of Anarchists. Demanding the Impossible is a good book. I still haven't finished that. And then the best solution I've heard is Bookchin's last book, Free Cities, Communalism, and the Left. And he actually explains the state is a monopoly on force. We don't want that. But interestingly enough, he delineates the state as a monopoly on force and mafia people. He says there can be legitimacy in government, meaning governing bodies like workers' councils, primitive tribes, if you want to have like some kind of like co-op type council, assembly. He says like those are legitimate because you want to sit down and say, hey, this is my community, this is my workplace, can we decide on rules? And the best way to do that, I think, is do local stuff. So be self-sufficient as much as possible. Try and grow a garden, try and filter. But at certain points, not everyone's going to do that. So I think the idea of letting people understand what democratic and federalism is and taking direct action are the two best things to do, along with educating people on free market economics.
And Keith, first thing you would say.
Well, this question has a lot of different dimensions to it, and I don't know that there's one correct answer. It's a lot of it is going to be relative to individual circumstances. For instance, are we talking about individuals? Are we talking about groups? Are we talking about changing society or changing institutions? Are we talking about avoiding institutions? Like in my own life, what I've done is basically put myself in a situation where I'm not that dependent on anything. For example, I'm a freelancer. I'm not bound to any one place. I could theoretically do most of the professional work I do now and, go live in Mexico or Eastern Europe or Africa if I wanted to. Most of the work that I do, all of it is contractual, so I have a lot of control over the work that I do. I haven't had a real employer in years. I've also put myself in a position where I don't have a lot of obligations or responsibilities. For example, I've never owned a house, I've never owned a car, and I never had any children either. So it's not everybody is in the position to do things the way I do it. Like somebody that has a disability, like a serious physical disability, or somebody that has kids or something like that, or somebody who's very old and their health is failing. Obviously, they can't do certain things that I do, and I may get to that point eventually. But I generally am big on the idea of not being too dependent on institutions, because, like, I know I've had people before. They say, "Well, aren't you worried that you're so outspoken? That's going to make trouble for you?" I'm like, no, not really, because I'm not that dependent on anything. I mean, like, nobody can dox me because there's nothing to dox. I'm right out in front. I'm all over the place. I'm all over the internet. And sometimes people object to that. Like, I know this was funny. A while back, I did an interview with an atheist program, and they decided not to air it because they said they thought my politics were too extreme and too controversial, and it would cause a brouhaha in their circles. And I'm like, oh well, fine, suit himself. It's like, I don't care. And so I think it's good not to be personally dependent on too many things, and not to have too many obligations that make you dependent on things. Now, as far as groups, there's the idea of forming alternative infrastructure, or I call it, or dual power is another term for it, agorism and counter economics and stuff like that, or similar ideas. But I'm all for stuff like that. I don't know that the United States is the best place to do it. I think if I was really going to try to form, say a fairly large scale intentional community, say like a commune type thing, I'd probably try to do it in Latin America or Africa or some other places, maybe the South Pacific or South Asia. The United States is probably one of the last places that you can really successfully evade the state, except maybe North Korea or somewhere like that. So that kind of thing is going to be limited. Like somebody earlier mentioned property taxes and things like that. Yeah, I mean anything like that you do in the United States and really in the more developed countries, you're going to be facing a lot more barriers of that type. Although you can still do stuff like that to some degree. But then when it comes to activism, there's different types of activism. There's issue-based activism, like opposing aid to Israel and their genocide in Gaza, something like that. And then there's also institutional activism, where you're trying to create alternative institutions or change existing movements or whatever to make them more anarchistic or anarchist-friendly or something. And then there's ideological activism, where you're trying to persuade people of ideas and convince people of that your point of view is correct. Now, I wouldn't recommend going out and knocking on doors on Sunday afternoon with tracts or something, but but there are ways to do that.
Unless those tracts are the Sonic comics, those are okay.
Yeah. Well, maybe somebody should make up like some anarchist versions of the chick tracts. Like if you're not a true anarchist, you're going to burn in hell or something.
Yeah.
So I think different things are correct for different people. It's all relative to an individual's circumstances. As I said earlier, I tend to be interested in meta politics, and I think on a more cultural level, like somebody asked me once, well, what is your model of revolution? And I'm like, well, on a meta political level, something like the Axial Age, or something like the Enlightenment, where you see complete transformation of an entire civilization and the way people think. I tend to think that is far more enduring than something like the storming the Winter Palace, the Bastille, and like putting one new group of gangsters in power to replace the previous ones. So I tend to be more into the meta-political stuff, but on the more ground level stuff, it's really a wide spectrum of approaches.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right.
Right. Yeah. There's no one way to be an anarchist. I think if you've spent most of your life working for soulless mega corporations, you're probably going to be more interested in, fighting things like politically privileged mega corporations. If, for example, you've always lived a relatively independent life being self-employed, you're going to be more interested in protecting things like the rights of sole proprietors or small business owners, or protecting property rights. I think every anarchist has something to offer, and that we can work together.
So, speaking of working together, this next question is going to be the opposite of that. What annoys you and or pisses you off the most about other people who call themselves anarchists, and why? We'll start with Rose.
Well, okay. I don't know even where to start, because there's a lot that pisses me off about people who call themselves anarchists. I would have to say people who call themselves anarchists but have failed to follow the political philosophy they claim to follow to its logical conclusions. Basically, the types who pick and choose which parts they like. Well, for example, I have on many occasions argued with so-called anarchists who support things like IP law because they have a personal stake in owning a patent on something. This is not always, but usually applies to anarchists who came out of a conservative or Republican background. They're all about personal freedom as long as it's something that they personally approve of, and then all of a sudden they're back to wanting to prohibit behaviors that they are personally against, such as it could be abortion or degeneracy, porn, or
trans people.
Basically anything they don't personally agree with. They're all about stopping people from doing things that they don't like.
Yeah.
So I'd say inconsistency is my biggest pet peeve when it comes to anarchist circles.
About you, Denna?
I completely agree with Rose. Because of the circles, I guess those of us that are more involved in the Libertarian Party were exposed to those kind of anarchists a lot. I mean, yeah, my borders, my, some of them even say that, oh, we need some planning and zoning because what if your neighbor does the thing? Well, the neighbor's allowed to do the thing, dude. Who cares of the neighbors? And they like their borders. And, oh, yes, we have to make sure we don't have abortions. And we have to make sure that we take care of everybody else's health care, however the hell we want it to happen. And, we're okay with a little bit of marijuana, but don't you dare do that cocaine, because that's so bad. I mean, literally, I hear this all the time. Just turn on Dave Smith's show and you're going to hear every bit of what I just said when they talk about how much they're anarchists. And, I mean, it's good economy, but
it's all closed borders, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, literally, anarchists, there are no borders. We love everyone. Everyone's our neighbor. Yeah, and that's my biggest pet peeve, too, because you're in or you're not. You can't have a foot on each side.
And there actually are people now who are like opposed to legalizing recreational cocaine. I thought that was settled.
Yeah. Hody.
We are really bad at taking the momentum that people give us. We are momentum killers. We like get somebody who's got a question, and instead of like working with them and wherever they're at, we tell them to read a really dry book by Rothbard. I love Rothbard. I love Ayn Rand. I love honestly most of the liberty philosophers and writers. I like them, but it is such a momentum killer when it's like, hey, read this book that's about as long as the Bible and then get back to me. I don't convert people to Christianity that way. Like that, like read the whole Bible and then we'll talk. Like, no, that's not going to work. And the thing is you're also, when you kill the momentum, what you're saying is my will is stronger than yours. And people tend to be very strong-willed. One of the things that I love about like when they teach self-defense, if you're in a good self-defense class, is that some people are just going to be stronger than you. And so the goal isn't to be the strongest person on the planet. The goal is to say, if a person stronger than you attacks you, here's how you can use their momentum against them. Now, I don't want to attack literally the people who have problems with anarchy or any questions or anything like that, but I do want to use the momentum that they give me to come back to them. To say like, well, I got a problem with, I mean, let's give a real basic one that comes up against anarchists. I don't like people having sex with kids. And instead of going, well, tough, or we'll just shoot them to death, or if I catch them or whatever, like there's some, and instead you'd be like, hey, listen, here's how you keep that momentum going, right? I also hate that. It also makes me sick. Don't you hate how this or this guy got away with it? Don't you hate how these politicians have credibly had sex with children and aren't being pressed? Don't you hate how there's all this cover up? Don't you hate how a 19-year-old will go to jail for having sex with a 17-year-old girlfriend, but this 95-year-old politician who banged a 15-year-old on the taxpayer dollar is somehow immune from the same kind of prosecution? That's how you keep the momentum, right? Instead of being like, no, and killing it, there's if any theater kids out there, you may have heard the yes and exercise, right?
Improv, yeah.
Accept what they give you, right? Yes, and something else. So instead of being no, anarchists are so no this, no that, no, we're not dealing with this, not dealing with that. Challenge yourself to love more than about the issue than the person who you're talking to. That is going to communicate it to you. Most people's concerns with anarchy, almost none of them are just because I really love having presidents and I love it when people get blowed up that are innocent. Nobody says that. Nobody thinks that. They just are willing to accept it because of something they do care about. And so if they're going to believe in anarchy, they need to know that that thing they care about is something you care about as much or more than them. And if you can make that a challenge in yourself personally, to say it's just very important to me that this person is taken care of, say, I agree completely. I agree completely. And practice that practice of loving other people. Because that's, I think, really what's going to do it for us, is to care about the issues more and not less. Anarchists tend to be a drawback. Oh, it's not our place to have an issue. Oh, it's not our place to talk about that. Oh, it's not our place to stand up for trans kids. It's not our place to stand up for immigrants. It's not our place to stand up for people who got their house robbed. We want to pull out. The solution isn't exfiltration. It's integration.
Mm-hmm.
Anarchists win. How did the Christians win? The early Christian anarchists. They went into the middle of Rome. They went into the middle of India, the middle of Ethiopia, the middle of Israel. They went into the hottest spot. And so you've got all these anarchists talking about like, well, we can't make it work with all you statists, all you rot-brained, evil, duopoly-loving, Trumpers and Bidenists. Mm-hmm. So I can't. Well, then it's not going to work, because the world is a difficult place to live in.
Yeah,
and you're going to have
Bush
to accept
supporter.
it. Yeah, right. George W. Bush worked on his campaign, did tactics in Colorado, right? Like, I get it, right? Like, it's okay to be like, and I understand, as anarchists, you should be reflexively sick when you hear the state. I understand that. Go ahead and suck up that just for a second, enough to have conversation with your friends, right? If you want them in, you're just going to have to listen to them. People don't listen until they feel heard. Hear what they say the problem that they hear in your own words. And as soon as they say, yes, exactly that, then you can put your anarchist hat back on, but not until.
Uh-huh. It's amazing how many people drop the ball completely when it comes to messaging, like in this way. Like, for example, I think one of the biggest examples I frequently hear of is healthcare. Like, people will understandably bring up, oh, well, okay, without a state to protect me from, say, predatory hospital or health insurance companies, like, who would protect me? And unfortunately, I see so many libertarians dropping the ball on this. They'll be like, oh, so what you're saying is you want to enslave me and force me to pay for your healthcare? Okay, no.
Mm-hmm.
You start out by explaining why healthcare why the price of healthcare is inflated to 10,000 times what it should be. Explain how certificate of need laws grant regional monopolies to one or two hospital cartels. Explain how there used to be mutual aid societies and lodge doctors providing low-cost healthcare to community members, and how it used to be affordable enough that only the very poorest people could not afford healthcare, and there were so few people in that position that they were usually, like, there was usually someone who was willing to treat them free of charge. Okay, this sort of system was regulated out of existence a long time ago on behalf of the hospital and insurance cartels. So just explain to people that the state is the cause of the problem, okay, not the thing that's protecting them from the problem. It's the same with welfare. Like, you see people being like, oh, well, I'm disabled and can't work, so under your system I would just be allowed to die. Okay, no, you don't need the state to provide you with support. Like, people used to be very community based. There used to be mutual aid societies where we would take care of members who, through no fault of their own, could not work. This all kind of stopped existing once the state grew in power and started monopolizing all of these services.
Yeah, and you know, it's kind of funny, like, and like,
That's exactly, community.
yeah, like it's funny, like, a lot of these people will be that way about things like healthcare or, you know, fucking funding education or something. But, like, okay, these people will often complain about things like infrastructural problems, like potholes. They'll be like, oh, the government doesn't fill in these potholes. I don't see those motherfuckers out there with asphalt. And so, like, the question is, are you going to go out there and fill these potholes yourself with your own asphalt? And if you aren't, then do you really actually hate them that much if you're not willing to do anything about them? And then it becomes clear that the same people, like, that oftentimes make that complaint are just not willing to help other people. And then, like, guaranteeably, something comes up in these people's lives, they need something, they're gonna fucking ask for fucking help. So it's like, it's really just, it's the mentality of fucking, like, rules for me and rules for thee and not for me. It's the mentality of I got mine, fuck you. It's the mentality of, but, like, it's not actually they don't like government services. They would love it if the government services ran their way, if they just filled in those damn potholes. And they won't, like, you know, go out there with the asphalt because it's not my job. Well, okay, then you're saying it's somebody else's job to make society for you. Don't complain when somebody else adds something to that list.
I mean, okay, devil's advocate for one moment. If they're stealing half my paycheck and claim that one of the services they're supposed to be providing is filling potholes, and they're not filling the fucking potholes, it's easy to be like, you know what, not my fucking job. I'm already paying half my fucking paycheck to these assholes who are supposed to be filling those potholes.
Sure, like, that's a dereliction of duty thing more than anything else. It's less that they shouldn't be doing it. It's more that they should be doing it and they aren't. So at that point,
you could just start talking about accountability and how important it is.
Yeah,
yes.
Go for it, Jason.
How we have a social need for this, you know, and it's people. It's like, I don't know. To me, this is one of the biggest problems that I have with when I discuss philosophy of any kind with people, and they want to just, as soon as you start talking about, well, how are we going to enforce that? everybody's just like, well, I guess we have cops. And nobody really ever has an answer. And I'm like, oh, hold on a second. That's not how anarchy works. Anarchy is about us working together. So when it's time to enforce some rules, it's me, you, and your neighbor. And we're all going to get up and do it. And if we don't, we have to delegate this power to somebody else. And if we do that, they're going to abuse it.
Mm-hmm.
You're just adding steps, man.
Yep.
So that's the fundamental thing that I think most people just outright ignore is how are we going to enforce it? It's fundamental.
Right.
If
There's
you can't get over
no
that
real,
hurdle,
like, right
you can't
answer.
do any of it.
It would
And I'll tell
probably
you
be very
something else.
too.
If you can get over that hurdle, you could control the state we currently have. You could make it whatever the fuck you wanted it to be, but people have to stand up and realize that it's up to us to do that. Not at the voters' box, because that obviously doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
We actually have to take control of our communities. Grassroots, down at the lowest level.
Exactly. About you, Bryce, what pisses you off the most about anarchists? I cannot hear you.
I think he had to go deal with a client for a while.
Ah, that would make sense.
Yeah.
We'll move to Keith, and then Dana.
Well, I think the main issue I would raise about that is pretty much foundational to most of the other complaints that I hear about anarchists. And that is, it seems to me that there's a lot of people, and I've noticed that in North America, this is worse than anywhere else, or certainly in the English-speaking countries, the Anglosphere, it seems to be worse than anywhere else. But there's a lot of people who self-identify as anarchists who really are attached to one or another ruling class faction. A lot of these people that were being discussed earlier, the people who say, well, I'm a libertarian except I'm against drugs, and or something like that, and there are parallels to that on the left. I've heard people from the left say, well, I'm an anarchist except I want to have comprehensive gun control. The problem with those people, whatever they are, is that they haven't really shaken off the baggage they've brought with them from whatever they were before. Because, that's true of everybody to some degree. I mean, everybody to some degree is the product of the culture and social environment and political institutions that they've grown up with and always been exposed to. I'm sure that's true of me in some ways as well. There are probably some views I have due to my own, cultural background that I wouldn't have otherwise. But I think that among self-identified anarchists who are right-leaning, a lot of those people aren't really anarchists. They're just these traditional American know-nothings. That's a term that goes back to the early 19th century. The know-nothings were like a nativist movement that were, they were fairly liberal for their time, but they were also very, anti-Catholic and anti-immigrant and that kind of stuff. Liberty is great, but only for white Protestant people. And that's a deeply ingrained American tradition. I mean, the Republican Party today is dominated by that kind of stuff, and I've seen a lot of that in these more right-leaning libertarian circles too. I know years ago I had a conversation with some guy who was a self-identified libertarian, but he was also a Vietnam vet, and he was saying Jane Fonda should be shot for treason, for opposing the Vietnam War. I'm like, what the hell kind of libertarianism is that? I mean, that's just like this jingoistic nationalism, and I come across that on the left as well. Like I said, I come across a lot of people who on the left who identify with anarchists, at least in theory. But then if you look at their actual positions on virtually every topic, it's just a party line progressive viewpoint. And I always ask them, like, where do you get your politics from? Like MSNBC or something? So I'm not picking on any one anarchist faction here, because I see it all over the place. And like I said, it seems particularly bad in the United States or in the English-speaking world. That you find some of this in Southern Europe and Latin America and other places where I've encountered anarchists, but it's particularly bad in the Anglosphere.
Yeah.
And for that reason, I think that's probably the first criticism I would have of a whole lot of people who claim to be anarchists, is that they have not yet abandon the cultural or ideological baggage that they brought with them from wherever they came from. And even when you have people who try to venture past that, like I know some years ago there were people in the United States trying to move past the left and right, and then some of those ended up becoming white power people, or some of them ended up becoming Trump people, and so there's all these weird directions self-identified anarchists tend to go in, and I think a lot of that is not only cultural and not only experiential, but I think a lot of it is just based on a limited understanding of how institutions work. That's a pretty cool ringtone. That sounds like a alarm.
Yeah.
Or something.
Weather alert.
Yeah, but yeah, I think I think education is a big issue there, because I think like I don't know how many anarchists of the left. I have more personal experience with left wing anarchists than the more libertarian ANCAP type, although I've seen plenty of that as well. But a lot of left wing anarchists I've known, when you try to discuss topics with them, they don't know anything beyond what they read in a Noam Chomsky book they picked up at Barnes and Noble. That's I mean, and not that everybody should be expected to be a scholar or an intellectual or something like that. I mean, I don't think that's a realistic expectation. But I don't see a lot of these people don't have a lot of depth to them. I think one problem is that in the post-war period, like back in the 60s, you had a lot of people on the left, you had a lot of Marxists who decided they didn't like the Soviet Union. So they started adopting a lot of anarchist critiques of Bolshevism. But at the same time, they liked places like Cuba and the Republic of North Vietnam and Maoist China and stuff like that. I still come across that too. I come across anarchists who say, "Yeah, man, those Cubans are right on, or those Venezuelans are right on." It's
Yep.
And so I think that the influence of this kind of neo-Marxism coming from the left has been a rather baleful. And while I like Murray Rothbard, and I even like Hans Hermann Hoppe to some degree, I think their influence has been rather negative in some ways as well, because they were the ones that kind of opened the door for all of this this kind of know-nothing John Berger type stuff to come into libertarianism from the right. Like if you I think some of you were doing some streams recently on this
Paleo.
Paleo, yeah.
Yeah, on Rothbard's paleo strategy. All of that was
Yeah.
basically just trying to, that was about trying to reduce libertarianism to just lowest common denominator, know nothing conservatism, and to appeal to the most retrograde and ignorant people in society, just for the sake of growing your numbers in the short term. If you look at the Donald Trump crowd today, that's what that is. So I think that both those are the two directions that I think influenced anarchist thinking in North America that I think have been the most negative and had the most negative consequences.
Yeah, like the whole thing of homogeneity in democracy, the God that failed. We should do a stream about that book someday. It's something that
I'll need to. Yeah, I need to read up. I need to finish reading it so that I'm informed. But yeah, it's a good idea. Or just do a democracy stream in general.
Yeah, because there's a lot of critiques of democracy, especially as it's been implemented, that I would say are better than that one. For instance, if we're recommending books, fucking Friendly Fascism by Bertram Gross. That's something I've been pimping lately because I read it a while back and it's informed a lot of my thinking, and then I realized, oh, I ain't been pimping this, so a lot of people listen to me just think that I'm insane, and I am, but I also am right about that.
I was gonna say, are they wrong?
Depends on the they and whether they're in my head. So all of that. Let's get to Dana and then Kareem, but also before we do, Jamie Van Alstyne, shout out in the chat. She says, Hody, yes, anarchism is a method of living without the state and power hierarchies, a starting place and an ongoing journey of interacting with one another in peace. Jamie also says, Rose is right, no hyphens. There is no one way to do anarchism. Hyphens imply too much rigidity. Kant Lonatheus says, live as an anarchist in all aspects of life rather than just be anti-statist in politics alone. Also, he complimented Kareem on his Sam Beckett background. Dana, pisses you off?
Well, I follow on the same line as Rose. That's why I popped in when she was talking about that. That's just what pisses me off. And,
Yeah.
and I guess the height. That's why I said if you have to put me in a box, I would be an agorist. I'm not real good with what box am I in. Like you said, don't hurt people. Don't take their stuff. Just form communities of your own. And on my journey, we lived where we live, so that kind of helped as well because we are rural. And we do have a small community, and part of our fight and our battle of activism was getting planning and zoning, because like planning and zoning was part of our life in Warren downstate, and then we moved up here and they started trying to move in with this downstate kind of stuff, and we all fought it. Like the community got together, we filled up their rooms, we're like, no, leave us alone, leave us the hell alone, leave farm and ag alone, we don't want your stuff. And even my township stood up to them and signed a statement and said, we never want you, keep it up there in your rural areas if you want it, but don't come anywhere near us with this. We don't even have a dog catcher. They were afraid they were going to shoot that. He was going to get shot if he came in our neighborhood, so we don't pay for that. We do have a volunteer fire department, so there's grant money and tax money for that, but they, it works a lot different than full time. But then like we even have the park. We have a beautiful park with a boat launch right on the pond, which is part of the river. It's kind of, there's a dam. Cool. But we have this park. The park, most of it has been volunteer people building the diamonds and putting in the playground. We have an ice rink that this one guy, one of the neighbors that really wanted to do ice rink, he donated skates and takes care of the ice and all of those things. And we buy bricks to help pay for things and stuff like that. And it's really kind of cool how our little community of 300 people has one of the prettiest little parks up here in northern Michigan, in our little area. So, yeah. And that's the community, just people working together, doing it, the barter, the trade, just propping people up, helping each other. And,
for sure.
We didn't have that so much in the city when we lived there.
Yeah.
But we've been up here for 15 years and it's beautiful.
So what you really mean is that what pisses you off is the city.
Yes, the city pisses me the hell off.
We'll have to do an anti-civ
I try
stream.
to not go anywhere near the city. I go to the city when I have to go to like convention or some shit like that. That's it. That's it.
We'll have to do an anti-civ stream sometime. Speaking of, Kareem.
All right, so what pisses me off is like what Keith was saying, people who go to their right-wing faction. There's a lot of ANCAPs that are supporting Malay or like to do the copter, cuck thing. We're like, oh my God, wasn't Pinochet the coolest guy ever? Like he didn't even really have an idea. And yes, there are people on the left who want to do this left unity. And even the tankies are like, well, you never accomplished anything, ANCOMs. And there's also a funny thing. Everybody, here, I think, has seen the Charlie Brown and Lucy thing with the football. And there's a funny one where it has Lucy with like a Comrade Stalin hat, and then it has a Charlie Brown in like an ANCOM flag, and it says, come on, anarchists, we'll build stateless socialism this time. Promise. And it just has her holding the football. And I'm thinking, how many times has that happened? Like, come on, guys, let's just win the revolution. I got you. So to me, that's one thing I don't like. I also don't like the argument over terms. So there are a few anarchists I like, on the left and right. On the left, actually, there's a YouTuber I liked, and I said, I joined his Patreon. I think I gave him $5-10, and he had a Discord. And I'm like, let me pop in the Discord. I said, so what are you? I'm like, I like Bookchin's idea, but I believe in private property. And they're like, and I couldn't get in. And I went on to one of his live streams. I said, his name's Anarch, Daniel. I still watch his stuff, but I said, why couldn't I get in? He's like, well, you said you believed in private property, and we really don't want that here in kind of our libertarian socialist group. I said, well, I'm okay with owning things. And then I'll talk to ANCAPs. So there are some ANCOMs that are like, okay, private property bad. And then there's some ANCAPs that I'm like, well, what about a public library, or what about like this, or what about public property, or what about, the commons or stuff? They're like, no, like, we must privatize. Private property is the only legitimate property. And literally people will be having discussions about property rights, claims constantly, or even terms about property. And this extends to, I'm sure, to primitivists and transhumanists and pacifists. And so we're all fighting over terms. Like, is this term that term? Is this term that term? Can we call this? Meanwhile, the statists are working together to do all sorts of horrible things like war, inflation, stuff like that. I'll say this, like, the funny thing is, like, ANCAPs and ANCOMs can't talk to each other. However, I think it's quite readily apparent to me that the people take it the Democratic side, the progressives will make deals with, like, the neoliberal establishment all the time, AOC and Bernie, and we can see right now with the presidential thing. I think it's very clear to me, although it's not something that he said, but I just read through the lines, that the if you want to call them rhinos, or like the old, I like Keith's, and the Sunbelt group makes deals with the MAGA group that says, hey, we like all the but don't get too out of line here. Can't you just have a little bit of old guard, Republican stuff to get the Adelson money? Can't you just do a little bit of that? So, and they'll say, okay. From what I can see, I'm sure there's pushback, but they'll say, okay. They don't always agree. But to me, that's where I'd like to see anarchists come, is the same way these duopoly people come, is they'll put their differences aside, and it seems like the neocons can work with the MAGA people sometimes if they do the right rhetoric and stuff. I don't see any reason ANCAPs and ANCOMs can't work together if we can come to agreements on terms. Same with mutualists. I wish Kevin was here, because Kevin says he's half and half. Even though some people don't agree with that, if we can get past these like definitions on, like, well, property or is hierarchy bad, or unnecessary hierarchy bad, or what does this mean, or should everything be voluntary? And also, if we could come to complete terms on, well, I don't agree with how you're doing things, I'll do it. I've told ANCAPs is this. They say no private property, everything should be private property. I said, do that in your community. But somebody in the town next to you can say, this is private, this is personal property, which acts the same as private property, but we also have public property. And then there's also something called usufruct, which is just the idea that you need to use something actively to own it, which you can implement there, which is done in Rojava, Syria, and the Zapatistas and other stuff. So I think if you can say, fine, my community does this, your community does that, we don't agree, but we're not going to kill each other, we'll be all right.
So, okay, this is one of those situations where you could probably resolve all these potential conflicts just by defining your terms up front, because all in all, you guys probably want the same things. Like, people on the so-called libertarian right and the left, they generally define terms such as private property very differently. Generally, the left is referring to state privilege property that was originally property that was titled and part of some of the original enclosure acts. So basically property that was never legitimately homesteaded in the way that, say, the libertarian right would think of legitimately gained property. Like, if we're talking about, say, like, property that was gained in accordance with the libertarian homesteading principle, as in you mixed your labor with it, you built yourself a house and a homestead, like, that generally is not going to be what the left is taking issue with. They're taking issue with property that was granted by the state and that is upheld only by state action, such as large-scale absentee property ownership.
BlackRock.
So again, I think you could have easily resolved these issues and not gotten kicked from a Discord server had you defined what you meant up front, I think.
Yeah, but they didn't give me that much time. Literally, it was, hey, what do you believe? This. And my thing, the exact problem is they don't give me the chance to explain that. It's generally, I believe in private property, fist fight, or I don't believe in private property, fist fight. So to me, people are like ready to like go to war literally over this. And there are some anarchists like Comrade Brett and Mad Liberty who say I don't really care about property, which is interesting. And there's some people who will say if you're not actively using a property, then you shouldn't have, you know, like I shouldn't be allowed to have, say, there's these things called like model homes. I shouldn't be allowed to have homes and not have anybody in them if there's homeless, which actually, that makes sense. But I think it comes down to this. Yeah, they have different ideas of to me, private property, if you trade for it or if you homestead it, that is in accordance with the NAP, that's in accordance with property rights. That functionally, personal property is the same to me as private property, unless there's some kind of distinction made. The difference to me is that public property is usually is something that we agree, hey, we're all going to give this to the community, just like a library. I asked one of my friends who's an ANCOM about this first starting, and he said, Kareem, think about the idea of public libraries. I said, yeah. He's like, imagine you extend that to tools. Imagine that to every kind of good. So I actually said, like, a hypothetical scenario, if I could go back and change bad events in history. And if Bakunin wasn't kicked out, and Marx is like, fine, do your thing, there would have been no transition period, and the kulaks would have just put all their extra tools in a shed, and nobody would have starved to death, and they would have had extra tools and extra food. Maybe they even say put extra food here. I think the delineation goes personal property in an ANCOM or a collectivist society is something that you need to live and to work and to do stuff, and public is stuff that everyone can use.
Yeah.
It's just basically, I mean, an ANCAP would just probably define that as private property, but like co-owned by multiple people.
Yeah. And hey, Rose and Jason, we both know two Chris's who need to hear from Kareem's earlier message about not being one of those alleged like liberatory communists who says that ANCOM's never accomplished anything, so they shouldn't speak about it.
Yeah, no, I get that all the time.
They're welcome to join if they want.
Yeah, I mean, if they want to come on one of these streams and like interact with a bunch of anarchists, they're welcome too. But I don't think they do. Maybe one of them, but
we'll have to do an Anarchist versus Tanky's stream eventually.
Yeah, you know what's funny? Haz al-Din, Haz al-Ghul, whatever you call him, he keeps asking Nick to debate him. Like, don't debate Nick Fuentes. I'll debate you. I would love to have a 2v2, me and Jeremy or me or whoever here versus him and Jackson Henkel, just to really see what this MAGA communism is made of, if it has any substance, because it doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, the problem I have with this, the left never has done anything, is most early anarchists were left. There's more autonomous zones. Even if you consider Malay an ANCAP, let's say Malay is the most ANCAP, he's not, but let's say he is. There's more autonomous zones. Rojava, the Zapatistas, Anarchia, there's Twin Oaks, which I found a guy from, he's in an anarchy group. There are so many left-wing anarchy things, and the people from Anarch Unity are in a commune. Jeremy's trying to start Anarchy House. So there's more left-wing, anarchist, collectivist things going on than right-wing. Now, people argue, well, you know, how much money or, you know, the wealth and stuff like that. But to me, anarchy, the wealth is, hey, I'm not being ruled over by anyone. That's better than just having material.
And my shit's taken care of.
Yes, and on top of that, militarily, I would even argue, and I've argued this to Harry Wells as well, that the best military, one of the best military commanders is still, and probably will be, even by modern standards, Nestor Makhno, who fought two huge armies in one. So when people say, oh, ANCOM's never, what have you done? Community gardens? You all smell, ha ha ha. I'm thinking, well, they're actually taking direct action. Why don't you do that instead of writing economics equations all day? Rothbard was a good thinker, but I didn't see Rothbard or Hoppe go to a soup kitchen.
Ever.
No, wait,
Ever.
was he better than Robert E. Lee?
Who is?
Hoppe.
Probably, yeah, because he fought two armies. But like, if we're gonna talk about like Robert E. Lee saying, yes, the United States has turned into, the Anti-Federalists said it too. The United States has turned into a despotic power, and they said, look, trying to force this, there's always been this, let's force this union together, it'll just work and be great and united and all this stuff. And to me, forcing the union together has just created a Leviathan. If the union wasn't forced together and we did the Articles of Confederation, maybe, just maybe, the natives wouldn't have been forced off their land and we would have had a better situation. But to close this, it's funny because with the recent events with Trump, we get all these politicians, some of the scummiest people, like, we condemn political violence.
Yeah, people who are just escalating things.
There's I think he's Syrian and Lebanese commentator called Richard Medhurst, who said, America's the most violent country ever. It's like, you came here, you colonized it, shot at the natives, shot at the Spanish, shot at the British, which that was justified, I'll say that, shot at the natives again. Then you expanded out and then started coups in Latin America with Smedley Butler and all that stuff. Then after that, you start wars in Asia, and with all that. Then World War I, World War II. Then you start attacking the Middle East. He's like, America's the most violent country in the history of countries. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Mongolia has them beat, but I don't think so.
Mongolia definitely has them beef. Haha, that's a food joke. With that in mind, with unity in mind, let's start with Keith. And what is your least favorite type of anarchist, and how will you work with them in the future?
Well, I guess that depends on what you mean by least favorite, or the least favorite in theory in terms of their ideas, or least favorite in terms of the kinds of people they tend to attract and how they tend to act. Of all the different branches of anarchist theory that I find most impractical, probably anarcho-primitivism is the one that I find the most, reactionary or retrograde. I tend to share the criticism of those who say, well, if under large-scale anarcho-primitivism, most people would probably die of diseases and starvation, because that's how it was in pre-modern societies. Now, at the same time, people who were anarcho-primitivist, I've known a lot of them, and I actually like most of them personally. I don't really have that many problems with them on a personal level. I'm just a little skeptical of some of their ideas, and that's fine. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe primitivism would be utopia, but I don't think so. But as far as the people that I dislike the most in anarchist circles, I dislike the really visceral leftists, the ones that are if with some of these groups, I don't know how it is now because haven't really been a part of this scene for a little while, but I know for a time you would have these people that anytime any kind of left-wing type anarchist group met, you really couldn't have a meeting because everybody would start calling each other a fascist and a sexist and a racist and some other kind of ist or phobe or ismist or something.
fair, there are a lot of those in these circles. But go ahead. Sorry, I just had to say that.
Well, I'm talking about the hard left anarchists. I'm not talking about anarcho-capitalists.
Well, I don't need to know if they're erect. Sorry, I had to say that. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, but I tend to like the really visceral hard. I tend to dislike the really visceral hard left people. And I don't care much for the ANCAP types that are just another species of know nothing conservatives either. You know, it's I don't have much in. I mean, so I guess what I'm saying is the ones that veer too hard right or too hard left, I tend to not care much for. Also, the ones that are in the same categories I was discussing earlier, where they're too attached to some ruling class faction or another, you know, it's like, well, I'm for anarchy, but we got to vote for Biden because Trump is a fascist, you know. And then there's a right anarchist version of that too. Well, Joe Biden's practically a communist, you know. It's like we gotta keep him out, you know. It's that kind of thinking I don't really care much for.
And how will you work with them?
Well, I don't have a problem working with them on some area of common agreement. You know, like if we're going to have a rally against the genocide in Gaza, I don't really care who shows up. You know, it's like that's, you know. So I mean, that's how I tend to look at those kinds of things. Now, I don't know if they extend the same courtesy to myself in some instances, but yeah. But so I'm not, you know, as long as they can cooperate on areas of common agreement, I don't really care what else they believe. Yeah, I mean, it's like the issue with the tankies, since that was being discussed earlier. You know, I mean, if you go back and read the original criticisms of Marxism from Bakunin and Stirner and Proudhon and other people that actually knew him, I mean, you see that their criticisms of Marx and Engels were correct. That, you know, like Bakunin said, listen to this guy and you're going to get something as bad as the Tsar, and they did. And I think the reason for that is that the Marxist view of power dynamics is extremely limited in scope. They see the state as merely an instrument of class power, you know, on a very collective level, and that's and plus all of that predates things like modern organization theory and modern systems analysis and elite theory and all of that kind of stuff. So it's anachronistic in that sense. And you know, and tankies are interesting because whenever you talk to them, like one of you said earlier, well, the tankies, the Marxist-Leninists, the Stalinists will say that, well, the anarchists never achieved anything, and look what the Soviet Union did, look what Maoist China did. I mean, you could say that about any state. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look at what Marx had to say about capitalism, he thought it was great. He's like, yeah, they broke down feudalism. They invented all this cool stuff, you know. And you could say that about the Asian tigers of the Pacific Rim in the post-war period: Japan, Singapore, Taiwan, South Korea. You know, or you could say that about National Socialism. You know, the Autobahn, Volkswagens, rockets. That's awesome. You know. I mean, the National Socialists were pioneers in healthcare reform.
Oh, and of course, without them, we wouldn't have the punch card system, and then work would just be so disorganized.
Yeah, and we wouldn't have any funny TV shows like Hogan's Heroes or something. Yeah, so I mean, the tanky arguments for their viewpoint, I think, are just really ridiculous and shallow. I mean, my view of those kinds of systems is that Marxism never actually came to power in a developed country. Like Marx always said that the socialist revolution was going to take place in the most developed countries, which it didn't. It basically took place and took root in feudal countries. And I agree with the interpretation of Karl Wimpelgol. He was a historian who studied traditional Asian societies and argued that communism was just a modern version of Oriental despotism, as they used to call it, or like a hydraulic empire.
Right.
You know, and I think that, you know, and in my view, you know, systems like Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong and Kim Il-sung and that kind of stuff are just resurrections of the god emperor states that you found in antiquity, like the pharaohs and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean, I think their whole ideology is a joke, I guess, is, you know, just to sum it up pretty well. So I don't really take their criticisms of anarchism seriously. And And I call them. I know a lot of tankies. I know elderly tankies who've been tankies their whole life. People from other countries who grew up in the Communist Party of France and participated in the uprising in '68 and that kind of stuff. So I mean, I know people. I know real communists, not just these types you see in kind of hipster circles now. But I've always said they were. I always call them the Republicans of the East. Because it's like. Instead of like these monster truck rally Republicans saying USA, USA, it's Russia, Russia, China, China, And
Yep.
interestingly, American style conservatism and Marxism, Leninism actually are very similar. This was something I noticed decades ago because I used to go to like left wing protests and then I'd argue with Marxists while I was there, or you'd have Republican type counter protesters and I'd argue with them. So I got interested in learning more about how they actually think. So I go get books from the Heritage Foundation, and then I go to Revolution Books, the Maoist bookstore, and what I noticed is that a lot of their arguments are very similar. Because there's common threads in all of it. It's like there's nationalism, there's an extreme social conservatism, and then there's also this economistic materialism. This idea that economic growth and technological development are the highest of all values. Permanent. In fact, there are some Marxist Leninists today that are starting to become more friendly to the American right than they are to the left.
Yep.
A lot of like these MAGA communists, and that's why, because the American right is really big on like growth rallies. Like this kind of aggressive capitalism, whereas the more liberal wing of the ruling class is more Malthusian. They're more worried about population control and
You are the
eugenics.
carbon they want to reduce.
Yeah, exactly. It's your footprint is the one they want to erase from the earth. Fortunately, there's still not that many tankies to really take them seriously, But a lot of the people who identify as communists in the West today are just social democrats. Like I know I was in Portugal recently. I was talking to a woman there who was a self-identified Trotskyite. And I started trying to ask her questions. What do you think the Soviet Union was, bureaucratic collectivist or a degenerated worker state or state capitalism? And she's like, oh, I don't really care about that stuff. She's like, I'm just for health care and, against homelessness and that kind of stuff. So she's just a progressive liberal, basically.
Yep.
Yeah, most of the U.S. left too. They're like, at most, they're like Sanders type social democrats. Like actual communists are relatively rare here.
So
Yeah, I know some of them. Like some of them, I don't agree with their politics. Some of them are, I guess, fairly cool people. I know some who I at least respect because they do things like organize worker unions or provide mutual aid and stuff. But
So Rose, actually, you would be the good, the next person, because I was gonna go to Jason because he was laughing a lot, but he left the room. Rose, what is your least favorite type of anarchist, and how will you work with them in the future?
oh god, yeah. So kind of similar to what Keith listed. It's hard to pick just one because, like, on the left you have the ANCOMs, quote unquote, who are really just progressive shit libs. Like they'll use some amount of radical language, but at the end of the day, they're gonna vote for Biden. They're gonna be in favor of state actions as long as they theoretically are supposed to provide something they want, or are designed to hurt people they don't like, such as gun control, because they think that only right-wingers want guns, when in actuality the far left is very pro-gun. But I also, equally, I can't stand the so-called ANCAPs, who are really just edgy right-wingers or alt-righters. Like they'll pretend to be anarchists, but then they just every single talking point of theirs comes from the far right, the statist right.
Gotcha.
Another thing. Okay, I have nothing against the ideologically consistent egoists, but I really, really can't stand edgy Sterner bros who seem to think that like their version of egoism is just, well, fuck everyone else, I'll do whatever I want. Unfortunately, I encounter more of them than actual ideologically consistent egoists.
Yeah. So what do you do to work with those people in the future?
Well, with the fake leftists, sometimes I can reason with them by like trying to explain to them how, for example, central banking is the ultimate instrument of class warfare. Like try to explain to them why, okay, I can understand why you might want socialized healthcare. However, it's the state that's the reason why healthcare is so expensive in the first place. So socialized medicine and giving the state a monopoly over healthcare isn't the answer. What you really want is a free market in healthcare, and then you'd have low-cost healthcare. You'd have a system where people are not going bankrupt because they got diagnosed with cancer. As for the right, that's a tough one because I actually have believe it or not, I actually have a really hard time communicating with conservatives. I guess I just don't relate to them very well. I mean, okay, if they pay lip service to free markets, I'll try to explain to them, like, I'll try to move them away from the direction of engaging in right conflationism, because a lot of times, like, they'll be, like, they're pro-capitalist, but then they flip-flop between realizing that we don't have a free market and, crediting capitalism with everything good that we have now. Like, I'll explain to them, okay, we don't have a free market, but, here are these things that you like, and we can have more of that under an actual stateless system. And then here are all these things that you complain about, such as, like, all these taxes that are being placed on your small business. Wouldn't it be great if you didn't have all these taxes and regulations you had to comply with? And yeah,
it's like Immortal Technique said in Rich Man's World is only little people pay all these taxes and fees. Jason,
right? I guess my
go.
is based on individual.
Hello, Bryce. Yeah, I thought you were back, but Jason.
Yeah, the people that I run into that annoy me the most are the ones that can't seem to have a conversation without talking about who they want to persecute for some reason. You talk about philosophy a little bit, and then the next thing you know, they're wanting to kill some people. Well, these people are the problem, or those people are the problem, and it's like, well, that's a lot of hate, man. That's a hard burden to carry around, is hating everybody. You want to talk about unity and making things work better, then you got to lead with love and empathy. So if the people that can't seem to do that bothers me a lot.
Yeah. And how do you work with them in the future?
Just keep reiterating how important love is, man. Communities don't work without it.
So you're going to be like, service-minded. If they need something, you'll still reach out and be like, yo, this is how anarchists operate. You want to, you want to take a step in the kid pool?
Yeah, well, the door is always open to anybody who wants to work with him. It's just that it's going to be open once, man. I've had plenty of people who come and I give a helping hand to and shit, and people are real quick to use kindness.
Definitely. Bryce, what is your least favorite type of anarchist, and how will you work with them in the future?
So this is actually a relatively new term that's kind of come out, but the term is blue-pilled libertarians, where like they are anarchists, but they don't really understand how the state. They don't actually understand how the state coerces and infiltrates the private sector, because they'll unironically advocate for like shit that the state's actually doing if it's coming from the fucking private industry. And it's like, no, you really don't understand what the fuck you're talking about here. And then because they think they know what they're talking about, it's just they irk me in a way that nobody else does.
And how will you work with them in the future?
You just gotta keep explaining to them what they're missing and hope they get the point, I guess. And I'm willing to work with them on issues that they're actually solid on. It's just it is those few issues where they just
What
The
is
point goes right over their head.
what issues are they solid on?
I mean, they're usually still pretty solid on war. They're still pretty solid on like social libertarian views. It's just like there was a point in time where like they were advocating for platform censorship because, well, it's a private company doing it. It's like, no, the platforms are being coerced by the government to do it, and in a lot of those cases, the platforms actually had sectors of their company that were explicitly filled with government agents
Or funded by them.
or
JP
like
Morgan's just a private
during
company,
COVID,
bro.
during COVID they'd advocate for they'd be for private companies mandating the vaccine. It's like, well, the private companies wouldn't be mandating the vaccine if they weren't getting government money and there wasn't a heavy implication that it was actually just going to become law anyways. And
Yeah.
That's right.
Dana, least favorite type of anarchist, and how will you work with them in the future?
Well, I would say the evangelical anarchists from each side. I tend to try to not get deep into the waters of what kind of anarchism are we going to have when the magical fairies come and we have this stateless society that's beautiful. I live in the reality of the fact that we have a state and they're here, and until we can have the stateless society, this is all just conjecture, and we're reading a lot of books and we all have our thing, but I don't have time to argue about that, and there's so many that just, you guys have all talked about it from both sides and everywhere, and it's got to be like this, it's got to be like this. No, just I try to avoid those. I just try to tell them, hey, once we get there, let's talk about that, because we have to get there first. And how would I work with them? The same way I have continued to work with all sorts throughout all of my activism, throughout everything I do. I work during COVID. The libertarians here didn't want to fight COVID, so I went and fought with the Republicans. During the weed fights, the Republicans and the libertarians didn't do much with the weed fights either. So I worked with a bunch of socialists and Democrats. Just whatever the hell we're fighting, I will work with anybody. I will get along with you and work with you as long as you're trying to do the damn thing. Just try to ignore, and I don't want to get into the minuscule fights of the stupid shit. Let's just work. Let's do what we got to do, and
that's the essence of coalitionism, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I was about to say, it sounds like you're advocating for coalition building.
Yeah, I'm all for single issue.
God forbid coalition building and getting along with folk.
Yeah, we've got to hate each other and jack off all the time, and whoever comes last loses. Kareem,
you can do that and build coalitions, right?
Yeah, but it's more awkward because if you build a coalition, you have to look that person in the eye the next day after maybe you splashed them. It's never a good thing. Kareem, what is your least favorite type of anarchist, and how are you going to work with them?
I think my least favorite are people who are inconsistent. I don't actually care if you have some bad takes. What I care is if it's always changing. I posted one thing and then somebody said, well, advocating for democratization of an institution makes it a state. However, what's interesting is that individual himself needs the democratization of a specific institution, or needed it to get to be able to run as a president. So to me, when people can't figure out, hey, I'm against this thing, democracy is bad and confederation's bad, but let's get states together and get delegates and elect Angela McArdle, which I'm not against, but then I'm against saying, hey, the idea is bad if we do that for, say, policy. I don't like that. How am I going to work with them? I already do work with them, but I call out the idiosyncrasies, and I call out stuff. I guess a lot of people want to make the argument now that libertarian socialism does not exist. That term is just contradictory, and how could you be a libertarian socialist and I've argued this with multiple people, or that it's just inconsistent. I said, really, all it is you voting on policy instead of politicians. Why don't you want to vote on policy in your own community? Who is better qualified to do it than you? It's not your congressman. It's definitely not your state house representatives. It's you. So to me, if we're not going to vote, like if I gave you a car and said, you own this car, but I'm going to decide where you drive it, how much, I'm going to use the car and get aid from it and then give it to other people. To me, essentially, like, that's what we have now. We're saying, oh, these people represent me. Do they? Who's lobbying them? Who is getting money from them? So they say they represent you in name, on paper, but they don't. So to me, I would just prefer people say, hey, look, I don't agree with this, or I do agree with this, but I'm going to be consistent and not play these games where they're like, oh my God, libertarian socialism doesn't exist. Oh my God, democracy's bad. But I'm going to go vote at a libertarian event. And that's one thing I realized. We're screaming democracy's bad and heavy red hoppa, and then we're voting on planks, literally.
Well, okay. I mean, that's voluntary, though. We're a voluntary organization that we chose to join.
Correct. But it still is democracy in the fact that if they count the votes, it is literally direct democracy where they count votes. There's no electoral college that I know of. They count votes literally on the screen, tally them up at the LP, direct democracy, and say, hey, I'm not against that. I'm just saying, if you voluntarily go and vote on something in your town hall and then scream democracy sucks, like if I go and 10 out of people in a town vote to get rid of fluoride in the water and one person doesn't and they like their fluoride for whatever reason, and they're like, well, democracy, and those 10 people say democracy sucks. I'm like, you just engaged in this. It's like a primitivist saying, like,
I mean, is it that hard to just buy fluoridated water if they want it so badly?
You could, yeah, but
in a free market, they could find someone selling fluoridated water.
You can get fluoride from your dentist, so that's not a problem. But my issue is saying, hey, I'm for this thing. Like, another example, anarcho-capitalism specifically means that the market does all the functions of the state. All of it, not like some of it, because that's minarchy. All of it. So when Malay pulls out an anarcho-capitalist flag and say, take this, leftist, I'm like, you're pulling out a flag and you're saying you're president. That doesn't make any sense. Look, and they say, well, he's ideologically an anarcho-capitalist. Well, fine. But to me, if you're going to just say, I have this ideology or whatever or stuff like that, and you're going to do one thing and then say another, it's not going to be consistent. Now, I know, hey, it's not perfect. We're all inconsistent sometimes, but there are people who are consistently inconsistent. And that's my problem. If you try and join NATO, that's a problem. So like, I'm not saying Josh Eagle anymore because he's saying he's a liberal, not a libertarian. But if he was a libertarian, then yeah, he would be the most annoying libertarian to me.
How would you work with Josh Eagle?
I wouldn't.
Right, he's unfortunately still in our circles. Like, he won't go away.
That is the question.
I won't. Look, there's a certain point where you have to say no. This is like if a libertarian says, I want to join NATO, or we should stay in NATO, at that point, can I just say, we're done? Like, if you're on the pro-NATO crowd, we just can't be friends. If you're pro-BRICS, like, it'd be the same thing as how am I going to work with Josh or Jackson Henkel? I'm not. I might, if he has a really good thing to say about Palestine, I'll share his post, maybe. But it's not like I'm going to go, oh, well, Pol Pot was just a nice guy. I'm not going to work with Josh Eagle. I'm not going to work with people who consistently say, hey, all Bookchin's ideas are garbage and democracy's bad, but vote for me in my LP, vote for me for LP chair. That doesn't work. So I'm just not.
Yeah,
So Kareem, what if somebody is consistently inconsistent?
Yeah.
Then I guess they'd be Project Liberal, or they'd be, or they'd say I'm a president and stay as president, even though they have anarcho-capitalist beliefs. Look, if you're really a hardcore ANCOM or ANCAP, what you would do is get rid of the state, like entirely, like make it not just. Now I get it, get rid of it piece by piece is fine, but at the end of the day, if you're like, well, I still want to be president, no, I just go away. Like work with people who are at least better. Like there's there's Cooperation Tulsa, there's Rojava in Syria. These things aren't perfect, but nobody that I know of is standing up in Rojava and saying, hey, I have to be your ruler. They have democratically elected councils. So at least they're doing the damn thing.
Yeah.
So find people who are doing the damn thing and leave the people who are like, well, you know, I think NATO might be okay. We just got to like magically make it do this or that and then have this enemy, then we're fine.
Yeah.
Well, when it comes to someone like Javier Milei, I mean, I can't see him as anything other than a con man. It's like,
Yes.
what kind of anarcho-capitalist is going to do away with Argentina's national currency and adopt the U.S. dollar instead? I mean, he's just becoming a lackey of imperialism. I mean, that's what
Right. He was anti the Argentinian central bank, but yeah, maybe the U.S. dollar was an improvement, but yeah, like it seems like he backpedaled pretty fast once he was in office too. Like first he was an ANCAP, and then he got into office and he's like, well, no, I'm actually more of a moderate, Friedman type. So there's that.
Yeah, he's
Fucking Chicago.
and then he comes to the United States and he's
fucking Chicago.
Sullivan and Bill Clinton, and then he's also aggressively pro-Israel too. Like that even has anything to do with Argentina. It's I mean, I just see him as a scam artist, and he's got somebody somewhere pulling his strings that
Well, I said this way back when he won, and a bunch of other libertarians were excited about it. I'm like, okay, if he was actually consistently anti-state and anti-central banking, he not only would he not have been allowed to win, but he would not have been allowed to continue his existence.
right.
So, the fact that he is allowed to be in power in Latin America indicates that he is just that he's not a threat to the U.S. empire.
So, real quick, Hody, what is your least favorite type of anarchist, and how will you work with them?
All right, so I'm going to say 3 of them. The first one's a joke. My first one, my least favorite type of anarchist is Michael Rechtenwald, but he's going to leave the party, so I won't have to work with him. But I am kidding. Mike, I hope you come on back here, buddy. I hope you get kind of reeled in after this Trumpism bit you're doing. In actuality, the 2 are kind of mixed. I kind of just want to say jerks, like the people who think they can have bad behavior and be a jerk, and like as soon as you're like, hey, dude, you're being a jerk, or you're being a bigot, or you're being an asshole, like they're like, well, in my society, I get to do whatever I want. It's like, no, I'm aware you get to do whatever you want, but you're making our movement look terrible. And this is what drives you away. When the Christians were able to grow during the primitive church, it was entirely internally focused. The letter to Titus says, be more mild, be more temperate, be kinder. It doesn't hold back. It calls like Caesar a slave owner and stuff, right? Like,
valid.
It understands that like Rome is filled with bad people and politicians. It's not trying to be nice, but it's saying kindness, goodness is what's going to solve it for you. Focusing on creating this positive culture. Look, we destroyed this government. This culture built this government.
Yep.
If we destroy all the politicians tomorrow, is anybody on deck better? If we currently have 2 presidents that are probably my least favorite presidents of all time running against each other, and I hate both their vice presidents worse than them. That's a heck of a thing to be saying, right? The people on deck are not any better. The solution is not simply just, if the government stops, they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop. So instead of focusing outward, we need to focus inward. Focus on ourselves. What can we do? We can be pleasant people to be around. That's a very low bar. And if we're pleasant people to be around, more people will join our ranks. It's that simple.
And so
people that want to get all like philosophy minded, like I can be a jerk so long as I say, but no Fed though at the end of the day, it doesn't work like that. The Fed's still going to exist, and less people will be anarchists because you've decided to be a jerk. And when we say like be a jerk, and this gets to like my third one, I think I'm going to hone in on specifically collectivism. When you decide to say, oh, the right's not worth recruiting from, the left's not worth recruiting from, oh, those are immigrants, they're all probably not going to vote our way anyway, oh, those are Christians, they're probably not going to vote our way, oh, those are nationalists, they're probably not going to vote our way. Look, we don't have the numbers to win, okay? Well, I mean, what, do we just want to jerk each other off? I can do that by myself, and I prefer to do that by myself. Thank you. But if we're actually going to do something, then we're going to have to be good people, and we're going to have to stop treating people as collectives. Listen, your aunt who voted for Joe Biden, I understand why you dislike Joe Biden. I understand why you think she made a horrible mistake. Treat her like a human being anyway.
Yep.
Right? Like, be kind to her. Be persuasive. Do persuasive things. Don't engage philosophically if you don't have to. Like what Jesus does. He focuses on feeding people, healing people, taking care of their wounds, finding out about their problems. He didn't say one word to Zacchaeus about his tax collecting. He simply hung out with Zacchaeus. And at the end of the dinner, Zacchaeus said, I'm not going to collect taxes anymore, and I'm going to repay the stuff that I stole. Why? Because when you care about people, you learn to get rid of those bad things. Healthy people don't vote for Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Healthy, healed people don't vote for tyranny. So the solution is to create more healthy, healed people. Not to simply try to get all the Donald Trumps and Joe Bidens out of the way. The swamp is too swampy. It's not getting drained, right? The only thing we can do is focus on ourselves. And here's how I work with them. And I actually want to provide a really positive answer on this because it's what I currently do. Now, if I say, hey, first of all, if I have a swimming pool, we're all swimming it together as libertarians. If somebody's pooping in it, I do need you to leave the pool. And if you say, no, I'm not leaving the pool, then you just have to go, and I will block you, right, if that's what I have to do. Most people, though, I think will just be like, well, it's not that much poo, or it's okay, like, hey, at least it's not the government's pool or whatever, like these guys over here, their pool is much worse than ours, and so it's just a little poop. And those people, at least I can be like, well, get out of the pool and like let's talk. The solution, I think, is, as much as I dislike these collectivists, and I very much do, the solution is not to kick them all out. The solution is to talk with them. I don't believe that there are bad people. I do believe there are broken people. And find the source of that brokenness. When you have a computer that's not working right, is the solution to knock down your computer, to punch your computer and throw it into the lake? Will that make your computer work better? So when you trash your opponents, right, like in the liberty circles, these people have problems with. If I just trash them, like just drag them, quote tweet them, make them look bad, have all these sick burns on them, is anything going to change? No. What's going to change? Fixing out what the problem is. Well, that's going to take a little more work then, isn't it? Because if I have a computer and something's wrong, I'm going to have to open it up. I'm going to have to figure it out. I'm going to have to look inside. I'm going to have to look a little more carefully. So I'm going to have to treat these people, to take my own advice, these collectivists, I need to not collectivize them. They're all individuals. They're suffering from a myriad of things. You look at the attempted assassin this week, bullied, right? What would have prevented it? Was it a ton of philosophy? Was it convincing him that Trump was a really good guy, or that something? No. What would have solved it? Eating lunch with him, talking with him, giving him a place to hang out after school. The video that resurfaced of people picking on him, and he's got that sad, tortured smile on his face where he's just waiting for his bullies to move on.
I haven't actually
Nobody
seen that.
Nobody steps in and goes, get out of here. Hey, beat it. Leave him alone, right? Like, somebody's got to say, beat it. Leave them alone. If you see somebody getting bullied, step in, man, right? Like, this is what's going to make a difference. I understand we're philosophy brained as anarchists. I get it. But most people aren't going to get here philosophically. They're going to get here because you cared about them. That's what most people do. Why is it that most Christians in Christian nations are Christians? Because their mom and dad love them. And I get it. That's not the philosophical answer everybody wants to hear. If people can be reached philosophically, that's great. But for those who can't, that's Jesus lived for those people. Jesus didn't talk scripture with anybody. We're told he only spoke in parables. You just love people. That's all you can do. And so what I do is I take them out. I have a specific group. It is religious, but if I see somebody behaving badly, and I talk with them, and I provide them a new community. This was one of the biggest lessons I learned from Daryl Davis, because most people learn the wrong lessons from Daryl Davis. They just say, oh, he ate with Nazis and white supremacists, so I can high-five them and hang out with them and make them feel good. No, he was honest right off the bat that he wanted to change them. I mean, but what he did is he said, the tough thing that's keeping them there is their communities. 90% isn't talking about how black people deserve a place in society. 90% of what they discuss is, hey, here's a new community you can be a part of if you don't like your old community. So if people don't, what we need to do as anarchists is be a community people want to be a part of. Who in their right mind on the outside looking in would want to be part of the anarchist community right now? You have to be a little nuts. We're so disagreeable. We're so angry. We're so hostile. We bully people. We are self-righteous in every way, in every interaction that we have. We belittle people. We act like our logic is just so much better and superior than everybody else's. And it's not going to work because nobody wants to be a part of that. If nobody wants to eat lunch with you, they certainly don't want to convert to your religion, and they don't want to convert to your political philosophy. So be kind, be good people. And this is what we do, is we talk with them, we work through the issues, sometimes directly, but most of the time just befriend them. And then after that, be like, hey, by the way, who you just had fun with today, that's a trans person. And I can't help but notice you've been bashing them, for the past couple of years. Maybe this is somebody that'll get you to change their mind. And I've had an incredible amount of success with that, because as soon as you love somebody, that you're posting that tempting meme that was were, it's going to be so funny. I'm going to get Dave Smith to laugh at my was were meme. Guess what? All of a sudden, you have a friend that you care about more than Dave Smith's approval. Mm-hmm. And suddenly you say, I'm not going to share that anymore. And it's not an overnight process. You just say, you stop bashing them. And then you start loving them. And it's a slow process until your heart changes. Right. I say this as somebody who came from the right wing, like the establishment right wing. And if I can change, it might take a while. It took me a long time, but it's worth that journey. Give people a chance to change. Be nice, be kind, be cool, be fun to hang around with.
So basically,
okay, but
go.
You're not a real anarchist, and also I'm superior to you.
I'm the only one allowed to be self-righteous by saying that I'm better than the self-righteous people. That's how it works.
Yeah, well, the three litmus tests that really exist, if you don't like saxophone or Sonic the Hedgehog, those are two genetic defects. You can't sit with us. So first off, Jason, would you mute temporarily? Because this is echo. Second off, the general vibe that I think, and then we'll move into general closing statements, because this is going to be, I think, the start of a sort of general anarchist discussion series that we should be able to get going. I don't know, maybe I'll just continue with the eggplant theme. I don't know, possibly, but possibly it'll be something else. It'll probably be something like once every week or so, but generally speaking, I think that what it could be summed up as, from the lot of you, is that Rage Against the Machine quote. It has to start someplace. It has to start somehow. What better place than here? What better time than now? It's actually just doing the thing instead of getting a representative to do it, instead of hoping that they don't stab you in the back, instead of hoping that the system takes care of itself and is honorable and just. Being there for yourself and being there for other people, instead of just waiting for it to happen, make it happen. So that seems to be the general vibe from this, which I agree with. And there's plenty of meat to sink into for future streams. So I think we should get to closing statements, and those closing statements could be flavored as here's what I do, and plug your stuff and why you do your stuff. Let's start with Keith.
Well, if you want to know more about me, there's a website, attackthesystem.com. It's just a general news and commentary site. It also has a lot of anarchist material on it, and it has a lot of original material by myself, including some books I've written and other things. If you just Google my name, you can find stuff about me, friendly and critical. Go on YouTube and Google my name. You can, or search my name. You can find a whole lot of past programs I've been on, interviews I've done, things of that nature. As to why I do it, I don't know. I mean, it's just one of those things. I one time I heard a musician say that he was just compelled by nature to play music, like eating food or something, and that's kind of how it is with me in this.
Gotcha. Bryce.
I mean, I'm pretty regular here. If you want to learn more about me, otherwise, I guess just pay attention to the Libertarian Party of Wisconsin. If you're a resident in Wisconsin and potentially interested in getting involved in the Mises Caucus, feel free to reach out. Other than that, Kristen, I'm telling you, you take issue with what I say. Let's get on stream. Let's hash out where I'm wrong. Anybody else in Wisconsin, you guys have issues with what I have to say, come on here. Let's hash out where I'm wrong. Don't be taking personal attacks at me in a fucking comment section. I don't appreciate that.
Yeah, and speaking...
What about somebody who told you to call him? Should he come on stream too?
Sure.
So, also for Bryce specifically, because he didn't mention it, I'm going to, in the Facebook share for this, once I tag followers, I'm also going to include a link. If y'all want to support a GoFundMe to help him get out of the basically abusive loans that have fucked him over, feel free, because he needs it. So, let's go to Jason. What do you do, where you do it, and why?
Well, I come from a hardline statist background. I'm actually a reformed guy, so
Same.
I was very much a statist. I was even in the military for nearly a decade, and then got out of that and went to work contracting overseas with the military for a while. And it's that, man. That's what changed me more than anything. Is war is fucking atrocious, dude. It's really, really fucking bad shit. Anybody who's advocating violence doesn't understand what the fuck they're talking about. I'm telling you, y'all don't get it. You ain't seen that shit, but you don't know. So, I'm very much against that kind of shit. It's very changed my life. Just took a long time to, realize it.
Yeah, we should do an anti-war stream with a bunch of veterans someday.
Yeah, we have.
But yeah, that's why I do what I do.
Very cool.
Very cool. It's that. There you go. That's all I got.
All right, Dana, what do you do and why?
Okay, well, my normal stuff that I do is work with my community, helping people out with things, making things right. We quite often have someone living here in some way or another that needs to have a place to stay, and then they move on and do their thing. So that's usually, one of the things we do. Like I said, I just work with my community, work in my garden, do all that good stuff. Like spend a lot of time in nature. Now, I've been distracted for the last year and a half or so because I fell off the wagon and went back to the party. So what have I been doing that's been consuming me that shouldn't have been for a long time? The Libertarian Party of Michigan and its chaos. So that's been trying to fix that, trying to bring everybody back together, unify, get everybody in the same room, which we managed, but that's not working. So now we're all kind of giving up. We're going to go to convention on Saturday and then probably back off until 2025 at this point because we can't do anything about what's going on. It's just going to fascism's gonna win out in the Libertarian Party, so it's cool. But anyway, yeah, so I'm just gonna continue to do what I do. My husband laughs because even when I do try to ask people to come back to, okay, let's say this last time I've been in, I've never asked people to come to the party and join. But the time before, I was, rah, rah, come join the Libertarian Party. But I was better at creating anarchists at that point than I was party members. They're like, well, why, if you don't vote, why are you in this party? Well, activism. Well, what's the purpose of doing that? You're wasting your time. And they made sense too. So then you're looking at them going, well, you have a point. You'd rather just be an anarchist than a party member. So like I said, I'm real good at making anarchists. I'm really good at teaching people to help each other out. And that's kind of what I do with this distraction that I have now.
Yeah. Kareem, what do you do and why?
So what do? I do a little bit of Anarchy. I'm also part of Mad Liberty, so trying to do some podcast praxis as well with Comrade Bread. I do these streams and I talk to people and just share funny stuff and memes on Twitter. Why do I do that? I've seen I've read about what the state has done in past history, and now I can see what it's doing in real time. And things haven't seemed to change. A lot of people are saying, and it was perplexing to me.
You just cut out.
Yeah.
Perplexing to me.
It was perplexing to me, how did people just let what happened in 1945 happen? Didn't make any sense. I'm like, how did people just let that happen? I said, well, I guess they didn't have phones and they didn't have smart, not saying that all our technology is great, but they didn't have access to the internet. How could they have known? Maybe they had newspaper things. They just didn't know. But if they knew, somebody would have done something, right? Someone will do something. Well, I think we're seeing a very similar situation now.
You cut out again. Situation now.
The situation now, we can see what's happening on our phone and bad stuff like this. So I've always been aggressively anti-war since the Bush days. And
I don't know if it's just you're too far away from your computer or something.
It might be my mic. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So ever since the Bush days, I was anti-war, but then I kept getting into what the state was and why it was so bad. Now, see, it affects everything. Central banking. It affects food. It affects the community. It affects my family. It affects my friends. So to me, if somebody's not taking a conscientious effort to make the world a better place, then I would really ask, what are you doing here overall? Okay, make money, have some fun. I get that. But what I really want my purpose to be beyond everything. And if that can be something like decreasing the state or letting people know that state power is happening, and it's also what would the world look like without a state. And I think, by all tokens, Hong Kong's not a perfect example, but we take Hong Kong, which was effectively a minarchy. It was pretty good. The Han Dynasty was pretty good when it first started out. Even America was okay as a minarchy, and those are minimal states. The Republic of Kaspai is pretty good. And I'm also inspired by people like the Zapatistas who fought. Some people are like, well, Kareem, anarchism isn't working. And I'm like, why isn't it working?
Right.
Or what Aaron didn't work. Yeah. And I say, how do you figure? Well, look around. What changed? I'm like, the Zapatistas fought for 50 years, as far as I can tell, 50 years to get where they're at. Rojava had to fight Iran, Turkey, Syria, and all that stuff, and they're getting started. So people are like, Rojava's a failure. Rojava just got kicking off, man. Give it some time. Mm-hmm. Things are going to be very messed up for a while. So if we can look at that and say, hey, they're out there fighting for it.
Exactly.
I think we can do that here too, and we're in a much more civilized place. And I guess the last thing that got me to really believe in it was even though it's not anarchy. I think Keith used the word cryptarchy. I was pretty inspired by what they did in Somalia. Not to say like Somalia is heavenly or let's go take a trip to Mogadishu, but to me, if warlords can say we're not going to kill each other, let's leave each other alone, and the country gets increasingly more decentralized and better, I don't see why we can't do that here with Western civilization. So that's it.
Rose, what do you do and why?
All right, what do I do? Well, okay, so I've remained active with the Libertarian Party, possibly against my better judgment, because I do believe it can be used as a vehicle for networking and for education of people who may be liberty curious. So I've met a lot of very cool people through the Libertarian Party. I'm also, I've stayed involved in platform committee because I think that, for example, someone who has just heard of libertarianism, that may be one of the first things that they look at. They'll Google libertarianism, Libertarian Party comes up, and they'll look at the platform. So I think that having good messaging is important. Okay, what else do I do? Let's see. Well, I help run a Facebook political theory debate group where I guess it varies how active I am, but like I'll engage with people and try to explain anarchist theory to them, and I have gotten some people who I thought were lost causes to soften up to the idea. It's always satisfying when I'll get like messages saying, okay, I'm not brave enough to comment this and argue with people in the group, but I really like what you're saying, and you kind of opened my eyes to a new way of thinking. So, yeah, basically I just try to talk to people and move them in the right direction.
Gotcha. And Hody, what do you do and why?
So I'm with the Love First Christians. We're just a community. We do Bible studies. It's really just a grassroots thing with me and a few others. We are growing. I mean, I think maybe almost 100 people in the server now. But where we just talk about stuff that makes us wrestle with our conscience. Assassination, as you can imagine, was a big topic this week, and a lot of strong feelings. And it's just a safe place for people to talk, to be able to say. We had a couple people say, I got to be honest, like, I know it's wrong, but I wish the guy succeeded. Like, I just have that level of hate in me. And I think it's so important because the first step to recovery is admitting you have a problem, right? So often people are bullied into saying, well, I know I'll get canceled if I say wish he was dead, so I'll just shut up about it. And therefore I can never address their anger or their hate, you know? And so you need a place where people can be vulnerable. And it's just been a really cool experience for both Christians and non-Christians to kind of unite around this topic. I've loved it. Like I said, I just came from a Bible study. Titus was on point. Please join anybody who wants to. Love First Christians on Discord. We'd just love to have you. As far as why, one of the things that I think anarchists make the mistake of is identifying as an anarchist, and I don't mean that because I call myself an anarchist too. What I mean is making that part of your identity. Reality, this is like saying a slave that has been released who's just constantly talking about those slave days and how bad those slave days were. The whole advantage to being liberated is the beautiful thing that happens afterwards, what you do with that freedom. Bob Barker got more people to spay and neuter their animals by giving it 2 seconds at the end of a really fun, zany show. Imagine if what we knew of Bob Barker was he deleted the whole show and only railed about spaying and neutering your animals for that 30 minutes. Would more or less people have taken care of their pets?
Exactly.
More. Or less, of course, right? Like if he had actually like decided to just dedicate himself to that subject. It's hard. Texas Roadhouse. What's the thing everybody loves at Texas Roadhouse? Somebody say it. Somebody say it. Anybody?
I haven't been there.
Oh, man. The
Oh,
rolls.
yeah.
Thank you. The bread. Yes. The bread. The
Oh,
rolls.
right.
Right? The bread is what everybody's obsessed with. That's a side dish. Make anarchy your side dish. Look, it could be your favorite side dish. I love mozzarella sticks like you wouldn't believe. It's better than anything else that I've been served as a main dish, right? But if it's a side dish and people show up, people are going to show up for your main dish. People aren't going to show up to listen to me rag on the state and be an anarchist. People will show up to hear me be me. What do I like? I like barbecue. I like 80s rock music. I like deep literature. Oh, fun one for Jason and our anti-war boys. We just read Slaughterhouse 5, and the intro where he says telling people like being anti-war is a little like telling people to like look out for icebergs. Everybody already knows to do it, but for some reason we keep screwing it up. You know, I just like don't be an anarchist. Be yourself. The best time to pitch anarchy is when you're yourself. People are like, you are such a light. You are so much fun. Like, tell me more. And somebody's going to ask you about your politics. They're going to say, who are you voting for? What are you doing? Why are you doing this, right? That's the time to mention that you're an anarchist. But wait for them to come to you. Focus on being yourself. I think this is the thing anarchists need more than any other, is to not let that be their personality type. Be a fun-loving, cool, funny, charismatic, whatever makes you you. Like whatever your passion is, get super into that. And have anarchy be your side dish. That when like people prod you about it, they're like, oh, by the way, I'm also an anarchist. And they go, oh my gosh, that's so cool. I think that's one of the reasons anarchists haven't been more successful. So what I wanted to do, and this is why I did my project, is I wanted to unleash my Christianity. And if somebody, like, this is really important to me, this is a big part of who I am. And then if somebody wants to be like, hey, tell me about your politics, yeah, we talk about anarchy at that point. But it's the sideshow, you know? It's not something that I want to run down people's throats. I don't want to say, God tells you to be an anarchist. I want to liberate people's souls, and then they find anarchy that way. That's a much more meaningful relationship anyhow. But thank you so much. I as always, I love talking with everybody.
Yeah, thank you all for showing up. Yeah, I really think that a lot of what we've been saying boils down to finding out your own deficits before other people's. And so many people are unwilling to do that. They're unwilling to Matthew 7:4 this shit and be like, you know, fucking pull the lumber out of your own eye before you look at the fleck in your brother's. Like, it's that kind of mentality that just pervades these spaces, and that's where we're never going to like get anywhere. It's the reason that that like all of you were talking about, like, minding your own self before somebody else. It's the reason Jason would say something like, you know, accountability solves this. It's the reason that, you know, Dana says do the damn thing. Why Keith doesn't like the people who are like too statist and extreme, and why Hody prefers the love first approach. Why Kareem wants people to just like start the society instead of asking for permission or questions. Bryce wants like people to just be immediately less corrupt, and so does Rose. But that involves like improving your own circles before anything else. Jason is unmuted, so I'm assuming he wants to say something before I wrap.
No, go ahead.
Okay, there's an echo in there. So I figured you wanted to say something. You unmuted for that. Generally speaking, yeah, I think that's the takeaway from today's stream, and I always like to have sort of a key takeaway. Anarchy is not just about opposing rulers; it's about opposing the mentalities of rulership. And when you end up, like, you know, not correcting the problem in yourself, but then claiming the power to correct the problem in other people, that's the roots of tyranny. And I think that's like the fundamental thing that most people should start to analyze, is what in their life they could improve, that they are demanding the presence of a state in order to improve in the lives of others. Because if you're not willing to take the power into your own hands, there's no reason that you should have the power over other people's hands. So, like, that'd be my statement on the general vibes from this particular call. And there will be so many more of these chats, these kinds of things. Now that LNC is over, and now that some other shit went down, basically, I'm going to try and make this about principle, and the Ethernet cable and the better internet connection means that you can see all my chest hair. You can see like all of this, and also just generally better quality streams that I should be able to do more with. So there's going to be a lot of positive changes for the better with this channel. If you liked any of this, feel free to like, share, subscribe. And with all that being said, grow your communities and grow your own personal stature. Stop being inconsistent and actually, follow your own rules. Be the person that you think people should be, or don't be surprised when people aren't that person and when they set up a society that seems contradictory to your interests. Because if you're not willing to follow your own program, there's no reason anybody else should either. So, with all that being said, that's it. Smash the state within your own head before you get anybody else's. And then people will probably join you for that effort. Get your actual house in order. Get your firm foundation before telling other people that theirs isn't a code. With all that being said, smash the motherfucking state. Thank you all for coming.
I'm an ANCAP man, an ANCAP stand.
Cool.